All right, folks, we're kind of getting to that time here where we're going to actually get started. I'm going to share my video here. Hello, everybody. John Marinas with Titan Cloud Software. Waiting for a few more to come on. So in the meantime, I think we'll do some introductions here and kind of chat a little bit about what the webinar is about. And then we're going to kind of go back and forth here. This is a little bit of a roundtable discussion between Jeff and I. So we'll end up also having a Q&A session. So there's a chat panel here. So if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat. All right, folks, my name is John Marinas. I am the Senior Vice President of Compliance for Titan Cloud Software. I have a background in regulatory operational compliance management and information systems. I've been in the business for a good, I want to say, about 28 years now. I've worked for Chevron in the HSSE department. I've worked for technology in the R&D department. I've worked for BP in the HSSE department. And in the early 2000s, I opened up a company called JMM Global. It was JMM Management to JMM Global. And in and around 2014, I sold it to a Canadian company. We worked with them through fleets and telematics. Over a 5-year period, they decided to go in a different direction. We sold JMM to Titan in 2019. And like I said, I'm currently serving as the Senior Vice President of Compliance Services and Solutions at Titan Cloud. My co-host today is Jeff Sexton. Jeff Sexton comes from the fleet side. He is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to health, safety, security, and environment. Jeff, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. As John mentioned, I came from the transportation fleet side. I spent 24 years running an environmental department for a large trucking company in the logistics landscape. Everything from underground storage tanks, above ground storage tanks, hazardous waste disposal, spill management, stormwater, drinking water, pretty much the gamut of everything environmental. And I came over to Titan in April to start working towards building a transportation fleet structure to expand into that industry and space.
Awesome. Great, Jeff. And then I see we have it's a very, very small crowd here. I see Bob May, Garrett Coffey. I see Dr. Howard on. Hello, Howard. Lori. So thank you guys for attending. We'll go through this. This is kind of a lead up to the National Tanks Conference. We're also recording this webinar so that if you wanted to pass this off to any of your colleagues, feel free. But we do see some clients and customers that are either prospects or current clients and customers, and then industry people here. So thank you for attending. I know it's a short group of people, but hopefully people will pop on here and there. All right, I'm going to kick it off. So the agenda today, we'll have a frequently asked questions part of our webinar today. So like I said, feel free to add into the chat. There's a Q&A section here. We'll field these questions a little bit more towards the end. We're not going to be sitting here talking for over an hour, so feel free to ask questions as we go along, and then we will answer them as we go. So we're just going to have a little bit of a roundtable here, talking about changes to the rules and regulations. Most of you are probably all familiar with what happened in 2015. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Some of the inspections and enforcement that's kind of currently going on in our industry, again, leading up to the National Tanks Conferences. Some best practices for best results to manage your compliance. And then, like I said, we'll have that Q&A section. So moving on. All right, so again, please type your questions into the chat box and we'll get to it during the Q&A. Again, we're going to send a recorded presentation to attendees after the webinar. Feel free to reach out to any of us at any time after the webinar to keep the conversation going. And if this sparks some interest and you want us to do it again or bring in more roundtable people, I mean, I'd love for Dr. Howard to be part of our conversations here, as it would be absolutely wonderful to have insights into leak detection, release detection, inventory control, statistical inventory reconciliation, wet stock management. It's all of what Jeff and I are about. And don't forget to please stop by our booth at the National Tank Conference, or I'm going to be hosting a pinball session as a speed dating little session that the National Tanks Conference is putting on. So we get to present to the regulatory agencies as well as industry experts such as yourselves, various solutions that are utilized in our industry with managing compliance and environmental and the environmental regulatory side of our business. All right, moving on.
And so, John, perfect segue into our first group of questions here. I'm going to throw it to you to answer this first one. Some of the differences, understanding USP rules are started at the federal level, then they're implemented down to the state level. Why don't you give a little bit of background of how that works and the state's difference between federal and state regulations?
Yeah, good. Thanks. So obviously we know we have the United States, US EPA, right? US EPA set standards for federal rules and regulations that trickle down into the state rules and regulations. So, for some of the novices out there and or, some of the experts, you obviously know that state regulations vary from, left coast has theirs, the Northeast has theirs. But obviously, the biggest thing is, the standardized federal rules and regulations that govern underground storage tank systems. Obviously, there are, I want to say, 38 states that are SPA states, right, that adopted the 2015 rules and regulations. But then there's states that have decided that they were going to go in their own direction, take from the federal rules and regulations, and then get approved to change their STIP or their state implementation plan. Biggest thing is between the feds and the states is obviously the states can make the federal rules more stricter, but they can't make them less strict, right? So I think the biggest thing is that in the 2015 rules and regulations, it did stipulate several different things for operators to ensure that they stay compliant with. Biggest thing that I see that has made a really big impact on an operator these days has been secondary containment, right? So, and then also inspections, as well as that, you have operator training. So those rules and regulations, which were not all uncommon, that these rules and regulations were specifically put in to address certain compliance matters at your facility. These were essentially designed and implemented so that there were more standards and a lot of less standards that each of the individual states had started coming up with various rules and regulations. Here in Illinois, we have Title 41. Right? And Title 41 pretty much follows the federal rules and regulations, but then just varies inspections, So, but those are really the major differences between the states and then the federal rules. Some of the things that I think also, I want to say there are more open issues. In one of the last Newey Glide meetings that I went to, I brought up that there's definitely in the leak detection and release detection that missing piece of inventory reconciliation. So as some states utilize inventory reconciliation as an augment to monthly release detection and or periodic release detection. Some states don't enforce the fact that the true up of inventory variance really plays heavily into how we operate at a facility level. So most of the states in the Northeast have reporting criteria for inventory variance, and that's rules, regulations that have been established with the state implementation plan, but then it's laxed everywhere else. So until you get to Texas and or some of the other Western states, then that's not a requirement. Well, if you do have an indicative release or a leak indicative release, then you're going to have to account for that inventory variance. So just throwing out there one of those things. But the next one that we're going to be talking about is the 2015 did mark some of the biggest changes to the regulations in decades. How did that change things for compliance teams? Well, hey, you're a great guy to talk to about that because you were a stakeholder, right? And coming on board here, seeing our side from the stakeholder perspective, what were the biggest changes in those regulations for you?
Yeah, I mean, launching the 2015 rules, I think the biggest challenge as an operator we had is just every state had a different timeline of when they were going to implement anything. So you had to stay on top of those requirements. Probably the biggest requirement that hit everybody is the monthly or 30-day walkthrough. California was already doing it, but then as other states started coming on board with it, they had their own requirements, whether it was a month, 30 days, their own form, the questions behind it, and then who could do it. That was the other piece of it with UST operator training. And so getting to a point of being able to track your monthly inspections, making sure they were done on time, and then how do you know if you have a problem? A lot of locations, they just don't have the staff to start doing a monthly inspection, let alone the technical expertise. So what does that look like as far as could you outsource it? In some states you could, some states you couldn't outsource it. So it was a big challenge. And now if you're outsourcing it, that was a huge cost now, depending on how many locations you had, where you were at, you were looking, a couple $100 per month per site to now start doing a monthly inspection. The concept's great. How many times does somebody actually look at a fuel system outside of annual testing to make sure there is no leak? Everything is working correctly. The backbone was, is there any harm being caused to the environment, drinking water specifically? And this was another way to get it across to the operators that you need to look at your system and maintain them and keep them in compliance. But it did add an extra layer of tracking and record keeping that we weren't used to. And then when you get into the UST operator training, A, B, and C, California had their designated operator training already. So a lot of the models were, taken off of that. But that was a challenge too. How do you get the right people trained? A lot of people maybe at the facility, once again, didn't really understand compliance, that the fuel was coming out of a nozzle. That was great. That was the extent of it. So being able to get a training platform, once again, every state's training platform was a little different. And having to go through that process and figuring out if you're doing A or B training, how do you get that training certified? Who's certified? Is it a state program? Can you do a third party, certified program? Could you do it yourself? So those were all the different things that we had to take into consideration. And when you're operating in 48 different states, as I was, it all came quick. And so being able to have a lot of support and also some type of technology as we grew into this, to being able to figure out, all right, can we track it instead of having it on paper? So that was as an operator, to me, that was the biggest change for the 2015 regulations, were the walkthrough inspections and then also the ABC operator training.
So let me ask you, one of the interesting things is when you touched on the operator, the inspections. I think the big thing is that it's great, it's all fine and dandy. We do these inspections. They're done on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, or even the annuals, right? That some states require. the deficiencies, right? So then you have deficiencies that come out of them, you have to react to them. So once you inspect something, well, then you got to uncover what you uncover the issue. You know, what do you see as like reoccurring deficiencies that came out of these inspections, and then, you know, handling them, and how did you track them, and what was the best practice procedure for that?
So I'll jump back one more, because that's one more thing that the rules actually required you to do, is now to have a maintenance log. So if you have an issue, a deficiency, the corrective action, now you actually have to track that. So not only are you doing the inspection, but how you fix the problem so you don't have it the following month. So to answer your question, the biggest thing was water in the sump. I think that everybody in the industry has water in the sump issues. Probably also, hoses and nozzles, weeping, or they're afraid, potential leak there. And then just general housekeeping were the biggest three that we saw constantly, but by far and away, water in the sump was always, a big issue. And being able to track that volume of deficiencies, volume of inspections, every state, you can have multitude of questions, if you have multiple fuel systems on site, multiple sumps, it could, be a lot of data you're trying to capture. So initially everything was on paper, and which was a nightmare. You couldn't keep track of anything. So we migrated into, getting all the inspections done electronically, and being able to, have a workflow of deficiencies behind the scenes to make sure that we were, getting things responded to. And, there was times that we had the same deficiency for multiple months in a row that, right, once you get into an enforcement issue, that's not the greatest thing in the world.
Right. Yeah. Especially when it comes to, those deficiencies over and over and reoccurring. I do want to be mindful of time. It's about 1:21. So I just wanted to make sure that we're going to keep going. So let's go on to the next subject. We are starting to see more conversions on aging infrastructure everywhere, right? So how are those concerns playing out in the industry right now? Well, as an operator, why don't you take a few of those, and then I'll give you some of my sense, being on a couple of committees with PEI and others.
Yeah, so I think there's two pieces, and I'll take the current infrastructure, and then if you want to talk about future infrastructure, I think that would be good. So as a former operator, one of the things that we were seeing is failure rates. There's a bulk of systems that are legacy systems. Obviously, there's a huge capital investment if you want to do a new system. So we were starting to see, piping failures. Some of the states had single walled removal requirements. California has theirs coming up in a couple of years. Hawaii has one coming up. Massachusetts already passed, their deadline already passed. So that was the biggest thing, is trying to, match up with those state requirements, but also at the same time, as we were doing work, what's the best practice? Let's go ahead and replace the sumps, the piping, test the tank to make sure the tank is still, has the integrity is needed to last. And then, building some type of program around those issues that we saw during the inspections, or any other compliance testing, that we could figure out what's the risk matrix, so we didn't have a catastrophic release overnight. So that was, the aging infrastructure was really just understanding every year we go by, everything, have more wear and tear, and there's a higher chance of a release on it. So, John, I know you're on a whole bunch of committees, understanding that the diesel compared to electric vehicles, what are you seeing on that front?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that you see right now is that EV is making the wave into our industry through various mediums. So one of the reoccurring themes that I see, I spent some time in Europe working with the refuel group out there. They're built more ahead of us when it comes to installing alternative options for both EV as well as compressed natural gas and and other means that take us away from fossil fuels and ICE, the internal combustion engine. Though here, the common theme on, a couple of the committees I'm on is that infrastructure obviously is the biggest issue, right? And the size, the real estate of a lot, right? So you're not going to see a small postage stamp lot with 3 dispenser fueling areas. You're not going to see an electric charging station there. And then, it's time to charge. Plus, bringing in that infrastructure it challenges itself based on the grid, right? So, just in short, there's great aspirations that, by 2040, you're going to have oil companies that are going to go, net neutral. Well, there's still going to be the need for ICE, because until we can come up with more than just EV, it seems like the common theme is that we're going to need to have an alternative to EV as a method. I do see some questions coming in. As a matter of fact, so we'll segue back to inspections. One of the questions is their specific form for monthly walkthrough inspections, and Bob has said Ohio has a specific monthly walkthrough form. So thank you, Bob, for answering that question of one of the group members. That is correct. There are actually, specific. So I think not to, plug the AFI, you have well over 30 to 40 different regulatory forms that are specific to that state. So again, you kind of went back to operator training. Well, there's different rules about operator training and different requirements for the A, B, and C. Well, hey, same thing with the inspections. There is the standard form, that PEI puts out that a lot of states have adopted, but then again, they don't have the specific forms for that state. So it's very interesting how some have adopted, but not all have adopted a federal rule versus their own state rule to manage inspections. Jeff?
Yeah, another question came in. How do you get USD operators trained? So once again, every state's a little different. On C operators, you can have it your own training internally, or you can go through a third party. A and B has to be a certification done through the state, and once again, those are some of them are third party, some of them the states have them, so it's going to be a state specific requirement. There's a couple of third parties that have the majority of the states training that they have been certified. So you have to check each state to see what their certification is. Most of them have a public on their web pages who actually been approved to provide that training.
All right, cool. All right, so let's, again, we have 127 here, so I want to move forward.
Yep, moving on. So, from your point, John, what's changed with enforcement since COVID? I have my opinion because I was in the middle of COVID as an operator and then came out of it. So I'll let you, go first on that and see if I got anything to add to it.
Yeah, so, again, I was an operator a long time ago, right? So it's been a while since I've actually been an operator, but, being in this side of it and helping our clients and customers manage compliance, enforcement was very strange during COVID, right? You had pretty much a shutdown of lots of agencies, right? So there weren't on-site inspections. One of the things that we did find, more towards, I say, the middle towards the end of COVID. Well, it's not really the end of COVID. COVID didn't really actually end, So what we had found out is that regulatory agencies were more adept to receiving electronic files, compliance binders. It's always been a very archaic industry to where you have a binder out at a site and an inspector needs to go see that piece of paper and trust that that piece of paper says that you're compliant. So that seemed to be like the big Bible. Well, I think technology has changed enforcement quite a bit. You have, not only ours, and this isn't about selling our product. This is all about technology. Now, the future of technology being able to deliver information faster. So, as part of my outreach to the regulatory community, I was asking me, like, so, during COVID, how has your enforcement changed? And getting feedback from the regulatory agencies has always been like, I'm glad when an internal process, it is well run and well structured by an operator, because I can get information easily that is going to determine whether they've complied or not, right? So I think technology in some form or fashion, even if you're just managing it on spreadsheets and have that at your fingertips to be able to give to the regulatory agency prior to them coming out, I think is streamlined the ability to be able to be proactive. And those who have not really embraced it from the regulatory side are starting to ask a lot more questions. So as I've gone to various workshops and other regulatory events that are starting to open up now, I get more questions like, well, what does this mean? What does this report look like? And I like that engagement from the regulatory agency. But so to answer your question.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to it, I saw the same thing, but a lot of states are starting to have their own software systems and capturing the data instead of everything being captured at the time of the inspection. They're getting it ahead of time through multiple means, either asking for it or through other records or sources that they're getting it from. So that kind of leads into the next, how do you prepare for an inspection? And that for me as an operator, you had two different cases. You had the case of inspections that the regulator would announce that they're coming, give you a heads up that, hey, we're going to be there in 2 weeks. In that case, the best thing you can do is, hey, what records are you going to look for? Can I send you something ahead of time? And coming out of COVID, a lot of the inspectors still are, how can I speed up my inspection so I'm not sitting on site waiting for documents? And it gets them in and out quicker if you can get them records ahead of time. And then for those other ones that are not announced, there's two different ways you can look at. Some states you can predict when they're going to be. I know, like in Michigan, we knew when they were going to be at all of our facilities because it was a history. They were always at this facility within a 2-month period, so we know they were coming. So that was easy. It was kind of like a heads up, and not really a heads up. But then on those being able to be prepared and have all your documents in a centralized location that they're going to ask for. Most of the states have some type of check sheet that the inspectors go off of. Some of them are public, some of them are not, but they're all pretty much similar. And being able to have those documents accessible for somebody on site, or if you can email them over, will go a long way to actually speed up those inspections, getting showing the inspector that you actually have your act together and you have all your records accessible and in one place, and you're actually managing your compliance.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. So do you think the goal of the inspector's inspection has changed in recent years?
I would say a little bit. One of the things I'll say on the inspector side is they've gotten more sophisticated, more knowledgeable of equipment and just the landscape in general. Obviously, there's been a ton of media on environmental non-compliance across multiple different types of media. And to me, the inspectors really are now coming not to fine you for just because you didn't have a paperwork, but they're making sure you are not a polluter, you're not harming the groundwater. They're actually taking into the consideration the environment instead of just the paperwork issue. Now, you still have some paperwork issues. Obviously, paperwork could lead to other things, but that I do think the inspectors have gotten more intelligent, more tech savvy, more understanding of systems and business acumen.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that sentiment. You're always going to have your newbies, but then you're going to have people who, we've kind of normalized our industry, right? So earlier on in the 80s and 90s, lots of things were new, and the technology hasn't changed all that much when it comes to a fueling facility. I mean, a submersible turbine pump is a submersible turbine pump. A leak detector is a leak detector. A sensor is a sensor. So it's just become much more common to see a streamlined process with the various states for inspecting, and the agencies have, I think, done a better job at training. I like the whole proactive approach versus the reactive approach. I mean, it's always been the way that I like to manage compliance for my company. So, but yeah, so moving on.
We got another question that came in. What are some of the most common violations? And I can hit a couple of them real quick. Failed testing, annual testing not completed on time, alarms not responded to, deficiencies in monthly inspections or gaps on monthly inspections. Any other ones you want to throw in there, John? But that's the ones typically I've seen.
I think you hit most of those. I do see that on the paperwork, the alarm logs. I think that's very, very common now. Prior to us obviously having ATGs installed, the alarm logs, and then what was done to clear the alarm. So I think that's one of them that I see for violations. But then again, it's state by state who requires you to have an alarm log. So, all right, let's move on here. So best practices, Jeff, I'm gonna let you take this here and just kind of run with it. So,
okay. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know what the Environmental Justice Program is, I'll just give you a 30-second high level. It's a program that was launched in the Obama era to ensure that low income and minority neighborhoods get the same type of compliance and oversight than other neighborhoods and communities. So we're not overlooking, we're not polluting into those neighborhoods. So one of the things I'll say is I've seen is the environmental justice factor, the federal EPA requirement, and policies, procedures, enforcement. A lot of states have adopted it and twisted it just like into their own programs, just like everything else. But the one thing with it I will say is it does factor into the potential penalty. I've seen that multiple times, that if you're operating in one of those locations with those criteria, that you could actually have a higher fine than someplace else, because they're viewed as you now are harming those low income and minority locations. So that's one of the new twists on it that you have to take into consideration. It should be compliance no matter where you're at, but that's just an extra factor to have in there. And for me, I'll just roll all the way through this, John. The records, the biggest thing is electronic. Being able to keep records electronic, being able to tag them correctly, file them correctly, having some type of system that makes sense to yourself as a compliance person, but also as a local facility. And then being able to email those in and out of the system and give them to the operator or give them access, to the inspectors or regulated community is, key. And being able to have a checkbox of you have all of these documents in order and you can assess them at any time, and everybody can assess them is key on the records. And technology, John touched on a little bit, but technology is just going to keep further in advancing. The equipment is the equipment, but I think the more data that will be able to be pulled from those equipment, whether it's through dispensers or ATGs or sump sensors or interstitial space, or groundwater monitoring, vapor recovery. There's a whole bunch of different monitoring systems out there that there's data there. It's just how does that data get captured and who has access to it. One of the things that is starting to become more and more prevalent is having third-party citizen action lawsuits against companies. They can gather data, they can get data through different public resources. So being able to have the best technology, but also being able to have all your data in one spot that you're able to actually manage it and respond to issues as they occur is going to be key, moving forward for the industry.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and I'm a big, obviously, technology fan. I wish that there were more API integrations with states, for example. So regardless of what system you're utilizing, it'd be nice to have an API integration with their data system to get streamlined results faster. So instead of requesting, it should be automatic. So for example, if compliance testing was done through a vendor A, why doesn't that result get uploaded, QA, QC'd into a system and then automatically pushed into the state's websites? I know that, for example, we have in the state of Illinois, you upload you upload their form, which says that it passed and completed, but then you keep the result yourself or it goes on site. Well, who's looking at that raw result, right? It's just saying it passed. And then you're going to the facility looking for that testing documentation. So it seems like there still could be a way to bridge that gap with technology to be able to get it there faster. My personal opinion, APIs are the way to do that. So,
and it's funny you mentioned that, because with other environmental media, whether it's hazardous waste or stormwater or some of the other reporting, that exists today. So
right.
It's the tank side of it's just kind of lagging behind. So yeah, I do see that coming eventually. It's just who's going to be the first and
right.
And bridge the gap.
All right, we are at 1:41. I really want to keep this underneath an hour, so let's hit the next one.
Actually, we got a question that came through, John, and I'm going to give this one to you. With all the states coming out with emission reduction goals, how's that going to affect storage of gas and diesel? You kind of touched on that a little bit with charging stations, and you see that in the news every day that in 2035 we're going to have zero emissions or this or that. How do you see that affecting going forward?
That's interesting. I was actually watching on Today's Show today the death of the stick shift, right? Which then all segued into the death of the muscle car. So I love the goals and aspirations that seem to be coming out from the regulatory community / political community / even private industry, stating that these reduction goals are going to have to come out are coming out. It's really interesting. It's great that the goals are there, but nobody's proposing solutions, right? So what's the solution to that? And it's just not one type of technology. So it can't be just say, we got to solely rely on reducing our emissions by X without saying, here's a viable alternative. Right now, the viable alternative, there's only one category, and that's electric vehicle. I mean, there's still hybrid, there's still reduction, but I mean, I still see, F-150s are still being built. Now, I know that that's going to start reducing. We're going to get back into the lower capacity, smaller vehicles. We, for some reason, went from the 70s and 80s to where things were smaller, then went gigantic again, then we're going to have to go smaller again. But at the same time, you got to deliver what the alternative is, because there is right now no other alternative. So I know we have another question here too, and that was my thoughts. I don't know if you had anything to expand upon that, but we do have one final question here.
No, my thought was the same as you have. So, last question, what are your thoughts on USPs versus ASPs? And, I'll take it quickly, and then you can, add your, 2 cents to it. For me as an operator, it was a mixed bag of USP, ASPs, and it really came down to, space issues. It's easier to put a USP under the ground, and you can design it so you can drive over top of it. It's out of the way. There's less chance of it being hit. But then if you have a ASP, you can see if there's a leak. So there's pros and cons in there. I will say, one of the issues with ASPs is capacity. There's a lot of state, requirements or restrictions especially on the fire marshal side, of how much you can actually store in above ground tanks and the capacity you could have on the property. Both of them in some states are regulated and other states aren't. You go into some of the Northeast locations and they regulate tanks down to 250 gallons above ground. It's really a mixed bag, and really it's what's your preference as a company and what fits the property.
Agreed. Yeah, obviously commercial, industrial, you see a lot more of it. You really, I don't think, maybe one or two driving out west into the middle of nowhere desert. You can see some ASTs out there along Route 66, but yeah, I'm indifferent. UST systems technology is better, now to be able to handle, releases much better than it was back in the day. So there is better technology. So, it's based on personal preference. So, all right. So we're at 1:45 and we have, so basically, folks, what to watch out for at our National Tanks Conference. Check out the UST Finder and Environmental Justice screen during the pre-conference workshops. My presentation, there's an enforcement roundtable, the exhibit hall, and then we're at booth 101. So please come out, see us. If you're not doing anything, come stop by. We have plenty of experts beyond just myself and Jeff to talk to. Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be there. We'll have some swag to give away to people, and looking forward to having anybody who's going to be there, stop by and say hello to us. So we got some questions during the webinar. Does anybody have any final questions, comments? They want to add anything?
A little quiet here, but you know what? Even if you don't have them now, we are going to send this presentation out to everybody that's been in attendance. But at the same time, if you have questions, schedule some time with Jeff, or send us an email at roi@titancloud.com. And really, we thank everybody for joining. Even for the folks that aren't on this now and are going to listen here coming up, Jeff and I are talking about doing a J&J compliance corner on a quarterly basis. So we'd like to bring, experts in to our roundtable discussions and, speak about, products, speak about your environmental compliance program and or just any other topics that you may have with regard to compliance related matters for UST-AST systems. So thank you very much. Really appreciate you guys joining and hope to see you soon. Bye, everybody.